People outside of California, and even a lot of Californians, they don't realize just how insane California land regulation can be. But as a boundary surveyor and a private land planner, I confront that insanity on a weekly basis. And it just blows my mind sometimes the crazy land use regulations that my clients have to deal with when they're trying to do a development project. So it's important that you, if you're involved in commercial real estate or land development in California, that you understand just how crazy the regulations can get. Why? Why do you need to know that? I'm going to give you 3 reasons why you need to know how crazy things can get. Number 1, if you understand how crazy land use regulations can be, then you will start to understand why everything in California is so expensive to build. Number 2, if you know how crazy land use regulation is, you can honestly evaluate whether or not you have the patience and the level of risk tolerance that it takes to be a land developer in California. So there's some self-evaluation you need to do there. And 3, it's important because you want to understand why you need an advocate, a professional advocate for your project. You need somebody on your side when you go to deal with this insanity from the local land use regulator. So to explain this, to help you understand just how crazy it can get, I want to give you an example. This is it's a true story. It's a real life example from a city in the East Bay, which will remain anonymous. I don't want to put this city on blast. They deserve to be put on blast, but I'm not going to put them on blast. I don't want to do that. But a city in the East Bay, and we got hired by our client to do what seemed like a relatively simple land development project. So he had a vacant parcel. It was about 16 acres. And he wanted to take that and he wanted to split it into 2 8-acre parcels, roughly 8-acre parcels. The land was vacant. It was zoned commercial. It was adjacent to an existing public street. As far as land development projects go, this is about as simple as it gets. This is a fairly small land development project and fairly simple. So we went ahead and researched some of the land use planning regulations, and we prepared a tentative map. And the first thing that happened is we went to submit the tentative map, and the land use regulators at this city called my client and told my client, this project would go a lot more smoothly if you hired one of our local buddies to do your project. We don't know why you hired Landon. We got some local folks here that can help get this project through the process. Now, I don't know that was blatantly corrupt, but it was certainly shady and I think unethical. Now, thankfully, my client came and told me that. He got that phone call. And I called the city up and said, hey, you better knock it off. This is not cool. And you need to process my client's application. And I don't want any of this monkey business about how the rules are different if you're padding the retirement account of the local city councilman. I'm going to blast that stuff all over the newspaper if you're not careful. So that was the first thing that told me we were potentially going to have some problems in this city. And it's hard to believe that kind of horse manure happens in the United States, but it does. It does happen sometimes. So we get what we call the tentative map in, the application for the subdivision, and the city comes back to us and they said, all right, we're going to approve your subdivision, but before we do that, there's some things that you have to do. So here's what they told us. They said, you need to go get about $25,000 worth of geotechnical work. You have $500,000 worth of storm drain impact fees you need to pay, so $500,000 of storm drain fees. We need you to build a 1/2 mile of water, storm, and sewer line. And you owe us $70,000 for ag land impact fees. Now I'm going to go through each of these requirements one by one and tell you why it was crazy and how we handled it. Okay. So the first thing they asked for was the $25,000 worth of geotechnical work. So they wanted soil borings. And so I went back to the agency and I said, why are you asking for soil borings? And they said, well, we want to make sure that that you have good soil where you're going to put the buildings. And I said, what buildings? And they said, well, this land's zone commercial and you're doing a subdivision, so we want to make sure that you can put buildings up on it. I said, look, we're talking about 16 acres. He said, I don't know where the buildings are going. They said, well, go figure it out. I said, no, I don't have to figure it out. What if I just want to do the subdivision and I want to sell the land to the guy who's going to build the building? He's going to decide where he wants to put the building. I said, look, this is ridiculous. You can't ask for soil borings at this phase in the project. I said, ask for those when somebody comes in to pull a building permit. And so they said, yeah, you know what, you're right. This is a requirement that should really be done at the building permit phase, not at the subdivision phase. So we got them to postpone that requirement. Okay, so that was a little bit of ridiculousness that we were able to resolve. Okay, the next thing they did was they asked for $500,000 of storm drain impact fees. That's a lot of money, right? That's a significant sum of money, even in California land development for a two-parcel project, two-parcel subdivision. So I went back and, we double-checked the numbers. We reviewed the code. Yep, turns out, they're going to owe this money. So I went back to the city and I said, hey, look, I said, if we do on-site treatment of our stormwater, why are we being hit with an impact fee? And they said, well, we don't have a good answer to that question. And I said, okay. I said, look, again, this is another requirement that should really be handled at the building permit phase, not at the subdivision map phase, right? I said, I don't know how much impervious area I'm going to have. I don't know how long these parcels may sit undeveloped. I said, you need to go collect this money when you have an idea of what's going to be built and how the on-site storm runoff is going to be handled. And they said, yeah, you know what? We think you're right. This should probably be handled at the building permit phase. So again, that was something else that we were able to get addressed. We got that resolved by putting that requirement at the right place in the land development project. Okay, so the second to the last thing they wanted was the nearest municipal water, sewer, and storm was about a half a mile away, about a little over 2,000 feet away. And that was because we were on the outskirts. We were right on the edge of the city limits. And so they said, hey, you gotta build these. You gotta extend these utilities a half mile up the road. So we got to work with some engineers and we got some preliminary cost estimates to do that. It was not inexpensive. And so I went back to the city and I said, hey, I understand why my client has to do this, but I said, what's the mechanism to cost share or reimburse my client? And they said, well, what are you talking about? And I said, well, look, everybody else between my client's parcel and the intersection where the utilities stop is going to tap into these utilities. And the guy across the street that's getting ready to put in a 1,200 unit residential subdivision, he's going to be dumping into this pipe. I said, my client, just because he's the first guy in, he shouldn't have to bear that whole cost. He should either pay his proportional share, or there should be if he pays the full cost up front, there should be a reimbursement mechanism as other people tap into the utilities. And they said, they came back to us a week later and they said, yeah, you know what, you're right. There should be a cost sharing agreement. And so we will work with your client's attorney and we will come up with a cost sharing agreement to do that. Okay, so the last thing, and I saved this for last because it is the most crazy. They asked for $70,000 of ag land impact fees. So in this particular city, they had an ordinance that said if you're going to develop land and take it out of agricultural production, you owe like $8,000 per acre. It was a big number. So the city said, all right, we'll approve your subdivision map, but you have to pay this ag impact fee. Now, at one point in time, this parcel was used for ag. So it had an old orchard on it, but it hadn't been farmed in 50 years probably. This property was basically, it was pretty trashy. It was basically a dump. And it certainly hadn't been used for farming in a long, long time. And it was zoned commercial. So I went in and I looked at the zoning ordinance and I went back to the city and I said, hey, look, this hasn't been used for ag in over 50 years. And under the current zoning, if I read the current zoning correctly, he couldn't use this land for ag under the current zoning. I said, is that correct? And they said, yeah, you're right. He can't farm it. I said, okay, if he can't possibly use it for ag under the current zoning, how can you charge him an impact fee for taking ag land out of production? I said, that doesn't make any sense. This land isn't in ag production, and he couldn't put it into ag production tomorrow if he wanted. It's zone commercial. And they said, we don't care. Cut the $70,000 check or we're not going to approve your subdivision. That is crazy, right? That there's no person walking down the sidewalk. I shouldn't say no person. There are very few people walking down the sidewalk of this city that would hear that scenario and think to themselves, yep, the city's being reasonable. Now, if my client had land that was zoned ag and he had an active orchard on it or an active vineyard, whatever, then I agree. If that's the law, he should pay the impact fee. But that wasn't the case here, right? And so we had a situation here where the city, they wanted to have their cake and eat it too. They wanted to zone it commercial and tell him that he couldn't farm it. But then they wanted to charge him the ag impact fee for taking land out of ag production to put it into a commercial use. It makes no sense. Makes no sense. And that was one part of the city requirements to entitle the subdivision that I could not get them to compromise on. Now, you have a choice at that point as a developer. You can sue the city. And I have a feeling if you sued the city over that requirement, there's a good chance you could go to court and possibly get it overturned. Because even judges in California don't like that level of ridiculousness. But there's also a chance you could go to court and lose too. So that kind of local land use regulation is part of the reason why it's so expensive to build stuff in California. You know, here's a guy that's got to spend, $70,000 for this ag impact fee that really does not apply to his parcel and hasn't applied for I don't know how many decades, right? And there were other things that went on with this development project, but at the end of the day, my developer decided to walk away from this project. Now let me tell you why that's sad, why it makes me sad. This is a parcel of land that's basically vacant. It's not being farmed. It's on the edge of town, and it's a dump. It's a trash dump, right? It's not being taken care of. And there was an opportunity here to turn this into beautiful, landscape, developed commercial property. Brought jobs to the city, improved the appearance of the city, and it didn't happen because the local land use regulations were crazy. And that's sad. What's even more sad is that happens over and over and over and over again across the Bay Area in California. It's a really sad situation. So that's just one example. I could tell you other examples, but that's one example of how crazy land use regulation can derail the simplest of land development projects. Trying to take a vacant parcel with commercial zoning, take it from 16 acres to 2 8-acre parcels, and we couldn't get it done.